Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And talking about, my guest this evening is Ryan Rittenhouse, and we'll be talking about threats to the Columbia Gorge and related subjects. And we've chatted before the camera started rolling that 1 hour will not be enough time to talk about the threats to the Columbia Gorge with what's going on nowadays. How are you feeling right now, Ryan?
Very good, very good. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, you're not nervous?
No, well, no more than normal.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I'm always a little nervous when the show starts, even though I've been doing it for 15 years.
It's the blood flowing.
Yeah, and I've got some literature and we've done some preparation, and there's so much I'm going to be learning as we go along, because I've only, in a rather cursory fashion, followed what's going on in the Columbia Gorge, since I spend a lot of my time researching and looking at what's going on in the Middle East and the rest of the world, and my primary focus is on fairness and decency and things like that. So, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that too. But as you know, the show goes in two major segments. The first segment is what I call the bio segment, the who are you, where we get to talk to you about who you are personally, so the viewers will have an idea where you're coming from when you talk about the Columbia Gorge and other things. And then the second half, or 2/3 or whatever, of the show will be about things related to Columbia Gorge and what's going on there and the threats. So let's get started.
Sure.
And what's your whole name, your full name?
My full name is Ryan Dixon Rittenhouse. Dixon's an old name from the old country, the UK and Ireland, from my father's side of the family. And so I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. That was where I was born and raised, so I'm not a local or native to Portland.
And that name is interesting, Rittenhouse.
Rittenhouse, yeah.
Yeah, where is that from?
It's Anglican, so British, but then prior to that, it's Germanic. So
I thought it had a flavor of German.
yeah, it does. Yeah, obviously changed quite a bit from probably what the original was, but yeah, it is Germanic in origin.
My mother was a Heiser from Hamburg.
Yeah.
As you can see, I've got all kinds of things mixed in here.
Boy, that's good. Yeah, I think my family's from outside of Frankfurt originally, the Rittenhouse family, somewhere in northwestern Germany. So, but I also have a lot of Irish in me, and so all the mix of whatever is going on in UK for the last 2,000 years. So.
Where'd you get that rich red beard from?
I think that's the same thing as the Irish blood in me. The hair on my head isn't anywhere near as red. It's
what
pretty
hair?
much just brown. Well, yeah, it's gone. But when it's there, it's
sure.
much darker and not as vibrant. I'm one of those people that the beard color is different from the hair.
Yeah.
So, and apparently a lot of people with red beards are like that.
Yes, yes. Okay. So you told me where you were born. When were you born?
1981.
81. Okay. I have a trick question I can ask you now or later. Shall I ask you now?
Sure. Yeah.
Why were you born?
I don't know.
You are ready for
It's
that.
a good question.
Usually people say, why was I born?
Well, I'm also, I guess maybe one of the ways in which I'm unique is I'm not very afraid to say I don't know. There are some things I know a good deal about, but there are a lot of things I have no idea about. And when I don't know something, I'm okay with saying I don't know.
That's refreshing. Thank you. Yeah. And is it okay to ask you about your religious preference? Some people don't want to talk about that.
Oh, sure. No, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm an atheist agnostic, if that's how you'd like to describe it. Those are the labels that seem to fit my beliefs around the matter, or non-beliefs around the matter.
Are you a communist too?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't label myself as a communist. I suppose there's a lot of right-wing people that would probably call me a dirty commie.
I've been there.
But I don't identify as a communist. I don't even really identify as a socialist. I mean, there are many socialist ideologies that I like,
sure,
and that I support. But I don't really. I mean, I don't even know if I'd label myself as a liberal, because I don't know, it's kind of the same thing with atheist, but I don't feel the same way about labeling myself as an atheist. Like Neil deGrasse Tyson, you know who he is?
Oh, I love him.
Yeah, he doesn't like the label atheist, and he doesn't choose to self-identify as an atheist, even though he doesn't believe in a God. He doesn't choose to identify that way. And I kind of go the same way with political labels, because none of them really seem to suit me quite right. So I don't choose to label myself as a socialist or as a liberal, but most of the things I believe in you would probably label them as socialist or liberal political ideologies. So.
It makes me kind of sad hearing what you're saying in the last minute or so about label. It takes away an identifier, a way of my characterizing myself rather than labeling myself. When I say I'm labeling myself, that's all I am.
Yeah.
But I want to take back the idea. Yeah. So I'm a democratic socialist. And did you ever have a religious conviction as a child or earlier on?
No, not really. My mother was Baptist, and still is, I suppose, though she doesn't really go to church. And she tried to drag my sister and me. I have a twin sister. She tried to, yeah. She's in Thailand right now, in Bangkok, which they've just declared martial law over there, and I'm getting a little on edge about it. But she says it's fine, so I'll believe her until I don't. But
at least she's not in Africa.
Yeah. Well, she's been to Africa a couple of times, but anyway, I'm digressing.
Nice.
Yeah, but my mother would drag us to church every now and then, but even from kind of a young age, I mean, we would go to Sunday school and I'd hear these stories, and for me as a kid, they were just more stories. And it took me a while to realize that they were actually suggesting that a lot of these things really happened. And I started thinking about that critically, and it didn't really make any sense.
At a young age.
So, yeah. And so, I mean, I can't remember if there was ever a time where I believed that there was for certain a God and I knew what God was. So, I don't think there was ever a time where I was a theist, I guess you would say, which from, the way I think of the term, it's somebody who not only knows there's a God, but knows the character of that God and knows what its intentions are and what it wants.
I was always uncomfortable, even as a child. I was an altar boy for years, Roman Catholic kid, yeah. But never was comfortable with that. And and there was more than a few people who were very kind and loving and sweet, and they were very religious, very Catholic, and I presume that all Catholics who were good and loving people, and never mind, I'm digressing myself. You know what I'm going with that.
I get your drift. But my father has always been, my whole life anyway, a Unitarian Universalist, and I went to his Unitarian church quite a bit, and I liked that a lot more. I still remember one time I went and there was a Satanist there, all decked out with dark makeup and piercings and wearing a Satanist shirt with, I forget what it said on it, but it was clear he was a member of a Church of Satanism. And so I just thought that was great, the inclusiveness and the openness and the welcoming of all different beliefs and faiths. And I don't have any problem at all with people having beliefs and believing whatever they want. I think religious freedom is very important. My problem comes when people start trying to assert faith-based belief as if it's absolute truth. Yeah. And that's where I think we get into a lot of problems, where you get creationists thinking that their crackpot theories are just as valid as biological evolution and trying to teach it alongside evolution in the classrooms. That's a problem. But, if people want to believe that a God is, the initiating force behind evolution or whatever millions of people do all around the country, because these are just fringe elements. The majority of people, at least in this country, do believe in a God and are okay with reconciling that God with scientific facts like evolution. So as long as people aren't trying to push some sort of dogmatic faith-based belief down people's throats, I don't care what they believe. I just don't happen to believe it myself.
I'm concerned about how they're treating me and people like me, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And I will see how you've been until this moment to have an idea what you will be like in the future as far as how you're going to be toward me and people like me.
Mm.
Yeah. What do you do in your education? What was your formal education?
My formal education, I have an undergraduate degree, a Bachelor of Arts in Communications, and I minored in history and theater and film and English. So yeah, those were my passions, and I'm still very passionate about the study of history. Still very passionate about film and theater work, although I haven't been able to work in it for quite a while. I've been doing nonprofit environmental organizing for 8 years now, and it doesn't leave a lot of extra time for very many other pursuits. But
what persuaded you to go in that direction?
well, I graduated from college and was sort of destitute and without income and without a job.
Just sort of.
And yeah, just sort of. I mean, I still had a family to rely on and fall back on, and things weren't too bad. But I still have debt from that time. You know, it's still very burdensome in that sense. So I was looking for work, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in theater or film, but it's a pretty hard, field to break into, especially in Cleveland, Ohio. So I was thinking, well, do I move somewhere? Do I just keep working? I was working, doing some audiovisual work at the time, and living with a good friend of mine who was also very much into filmmaking, and he's a script writer, and he's still a writer to this day. He writes novels and scripts and things. But an opportunity just kind of fell in my lap. My father had recently been sort of remarried, and my new stepbrother, so to speak, was on the board of directors of a nonprofit environmental conservation organization called the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society.
Oh, yes.
And you've heard of them?
Oh, yes.
And he sent me an email kind of out of the blue saying, hey, Sea Shepherd is looking for crew members. Are you interested? And I was like, I'm not really tied to anything right now. Hell yes. So
get your sea legs together.
yeah, get my sea legs. And I love the sea. I always have. And so the idea of going out to sea for months at a time to help, preserve the environment, which I'd always been passionate about, especially wildlife, and that was kind of a dream come true for me. So I dropped everything, got a $90 plane ticket to Florida, which you can't get anymore. And this was back in 2005.
A while ago.
And joined up with a duffel bag full of some clothes and sailed with Sea Shepherd for almost a year. And that included the 2005-2006 campaign down in Antarctica against the Japanese whaling fleet. And that was incredible. Ups and downs, but for the most part, it was one of the best times in my life, if not the best time in my life.
Were you cold?
So,
ever?
Cold is sort of an inadequate word to describe Antarctica, even in the summer, which it was down there. But again, summer is a total misnomer when you're talking about being in Antarctica, because you're out at sea and you're on the ocean, and there's giant blocks of ice floating next to you. So that's pretty cold. But I tell you, there's nothing as cute and adorable as seeing a penguin in person in the wild. They're pretty amazing creatures. So, as are whales, which I got to see as well. So,
yeah. Makes me think about bonobos.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and you have a partner, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend? Or
I have a domestic partner, girlfriend, if that's those labels work. Her name is Nikisha, and we've been together for, oh gosh, how many years now? I guess, well, over 7 now. Yeah.
Oh,
so
it's a while, huh?
Yeah, we lived together in Texas. My whole time in Texas. I lived in Texas for 7 years prior to moving here, working on environmental conservation issues, mostly coal. And yeah, she got accepted to. When we'd been talking about wanting to leave Texas for quite a while because of the climate, both the political and the literal climate. And she got accepted to a PSU graduate program, which she's finishing up next fall. And I followed her out here, and we're making a go of it here in the Pacific Northwest, and I love it here. I love the climate, I love the environment, I love the people, I love the beer, I love the food. And there's a few things I miss about Texas, but there's a lot more things about Texas I don't miss. So,
is she going to see you on this show? Is she going to see you?
I don't know. I've been on a couple of shows on cable access.
Look at camera 3 and tell her what you think of her right now.
I love you very much, honey. Hope you're watching this show.
Have any kids yet?
No, no kids yet. So.
Do you have any memberships in political, social, or civic organizations that are worth mentioning?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't belong. Well, I've given to the Green Party, and I often vote the Green Party. That shouldn't be a shocker to people watching and listening. I also, I try, I don't have a lot of money because I've been a nonprofit organizer for almost 10 years now, but I do try to give a little bit when I can to organizations like Sea Shepherd, Public Citizen, who I worked for a time in Texas. I really love that organization.
Oh,
They're
your
a great
credentials is
organization.
perfect.
Yeah, and they're not a very well heard of organization, even though they're one of the biggest political lobbying nonprofits in D.C. and do amazing work in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yes. I've been a member for years.
Oh, great! Thank you for your support. So,
how about Southern Poverty Law Center?
They're great. I give it to them.
I took a chance.
So, yeah. No, there's
Deeds,
few organizations I consider in higher esteem than the Southern Poverty Law Center. So. And there's some others I've given to PETA before. PETA's pretty controversial, I guess, but I think they're largely also a misunderstood organization because there's been a lot of misinformation in the general media about them.
Of course.
But
yeah.
yeah, Sierra Club's great. I don't give as much to Sierra Club because they're such a big I mean, they're the nation's largest environmental nonprofit, so I don't feel like they need me quite as much as maybe some of the other ones people haven't heard of. But I've done work with Sierra Club for almost a decade now. A lot of the work I did in Texas and the work I do now, it's very much in league with their employees, and they are often helping out with the environmental work we're doing.
Do you have any idea how you arrived at this degree of social concern and loving humanity and other living things?
Well, loving humanity might put it a little too far. I love other living things. No, I love humanity, parts of it anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think from a young age, my father was always still is very politically active, and he actually was a whistleblower. He worked for the state of Ohio in a number of capacities, and blew the whistle on one of his bosses who was corrupt, and I don't remember the whole story. I wish I could remember the name of the book. There was a book written where the man looked at a number of different whistleblower cases, and my father was one of the featured chapters in that book, but he fought a court case over being fired for being a whistleblower for about 10 years. This was before I was born, and it ruined his first marriage. And but he felt very strongly about it and felt that he had been the victim of injustice and had been fired because he had blown the whistle on this crazy boss of his. And ever since then, and so that's who my father was, and through him, I was kind of instilled with a sense of justice and social responsibility and what our country should be, but also very much how our country is failing at being what it should be, and particularly our judicial system, which he's very critical of. So that kind of, I think, interested me from a young age, and I think it all kind of got turned on to environmentalism pretty quickly too. I mean, growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, you're not really a stranger to environmental pollution. I mean, we're the place where our river caught on fire.
Yeah.
So.
Was it Erin Brockovich?
Erin Brockovich her famous case was different. It was, I forget the community that she was in, but that wasn't the Cuyahoga River. But no, I think just being surrounded both by environmental pollution, but also really amazing, beautiful natural environment in Northeast Ohio. A lot of people might balk at that and be like, what? But there are a lot of very beautiful places in Northeast Ohio. The North Chagrin Reservation, which is a nature preserve. The Holden Arboretum is right in my hometown.
How can you love that place so much and say you love Portland now? You make up your mind.
Love is a limitless resource.
Of course.
Right? Yeah,
of course. So one more question before we take a break and then talk about the subject.
Sure.
Any persons who are dead now or alive today that you particularly looked up to or
Clarence Darrow.
Clarence Darrow?
Yep.
Why Clarence Darrow?
Well, again, kind of probably instilled by my father a lot, but Clarence Darrow fought tirelessly as a defense lawyer. I'm sure you know, but other people might not. Probably the most famous defense lawyer in American history. He argued the Leopold and Loeb case against the death penalty. He argued the Scopes monkey trial, defending evolution against creationism or intelligent design. They're synonymous. Argued a bunch of different cases, and I was introduced to him from a young age by my father. And I and this might also be something that impacted my atheism from a young age, because I remember watching Inherit the Wind when I was quite young, which is a dramatization of the Scopes monkey trial,
Gregory Peck.
loved that. Gregory Peck isn't in that one. It's Spencer Tracy.
Yes.
And Gene Kelly actually plays a supporting role in that. He plays the Chicago Sun reporter, I think. But it struck me from a young age, and I just remember loving the arguments that were, going back and forth. And Henry R. Drummond, who's the Clarence Darrow character in that movie, just has some of the greatest monologues, I think, in film history in that movie. So.
You're decidedly interesting to talk to about anything at all.
Also, I would have to say J.R.R. Tolkien, who's my favorite author. He had an impression on me from a young age. So.
Any other names come to mind? Any other people alive or dead?
Oh, there's a lot.
Couple more?
But I suppose, let's see, in terms of environmentalists, I think Jane Goodall comes to mind.
Rachel Carson?
She's pretty great. Rachel Carson. Although I didn't read her until I was older. I'd heard of her book, I think, by the time I was in high school, but didn't actually read it until college. So.
Silent Spring, it's always a good read.
Yep. So I think, and in later years, people like, and I might pronounce his name wrong, but Ken Saro-Wiwa, the African who was murdered for protesting Shell oil.
Yes.
Lynched, basically. People like that. So.
Okay. So we're almost a half an hour gone by. We better stop now, so we have time for other stuff.
Get to the issues. Yeah.
Yeah. So take a break, Mr. E, Mr. Director in the control room, and the mics are on. Oh, we are back. Thanks for staying tuned out there. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show because you were channel shifting or something, Conversations with Dr. Don that you're watching is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like my guest this evening, Ryan Rittenhouse, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and whatever it is we've decided to talk about. And so far, we've been talking about who Ryan is personally, and now we're going to talk about the Columbia Gorge and threats to the Columbia Gorge. So, shall we start right off here? I got some questions that I can ask you, and you sent me some material about the Columbia Gorge and coal and oil and all that stuff going through there. But let's just take off, and why don't you start the conversation, and then I may ask you some questions if you need me to prompt you or something, and let's just play it by ear.
Great, okay. Yeah, and there should be some slides popping up as I talk about certain topics. So,
of course.
Mostly, so threats to the Columbia Gorge. There's two main threats right now at the moment, coal trains and oil trains. So fossil fuels, basically. Fossil fuels. You could lump them all together and call them fossil fuels. Right now, and there's a map of coal exports that are proposed to go through the Columbia River Gorge, which hopefully will pop up on the screen soon. And,
there it is, yeah.
Yeah, there it is. And there were 6 proposals. We've already defeated 3 of them, the Power Pass Coal Coalition, of which Friends of the Columbia Gorge is a member. And so that's good.
These 6 proposals are proposing to do what?
To transport coal from the Powder River Basin. It's that gray area out to the east in Wyoming and Montana, and they want to transport it along that black line there, which is the rail line, all the way through Idaho and down through the Columbia River Gorge and to terminals that they want to build in the Pacific Northwest. And as I said, we've defeated 3 of the 6, so there's 3 left, and those are those red X's you can see there. The one out east near Boardman is called the Morrow Pacific Project. The one near Longview is called the Millennium Bulk Terminals. and the last one up in Bellingham, almost to Canada, is called the Gateway Terminal.
Terminals to store the coal before it's shipped out
Before
somewhere?
it's, yeah, so it would be a place, the terminals would be places where the trains offload the coal, and then it gets loaded onto ships and then sent over to Asia to be burned in Asian power plants. And on that slide, you might have noticed the total amount of tonnage is over 100 million tons a year, and that's an enormous amount of coal. In terms of global warming, this would be one of the top 10 biggest new projects worldwide in terms of global warming emissions, worse than the Keystone XL pipeline.
And where's the coal mined?
Out in Wyoming in the Powder River Basin. And that is a major, major cache of coal. It's one of the biggest caches of coal in the world. And
in the world?
Yeah, a lot of people refer to the United States as the Saudi Arabia of coal, meaning they were to oil as we are to coal.
I hadn't quite heard it that way.
Yeah, and so this is a big problem in terms of climate change, because we need to be shifting our infrastructure to renewable technologies, renewable energy, not increasing our infrastructure that makes us and the rest of the world reliant on things like coal. So, you know, that coal out there in the Powder River Basin, and I know the coal companies don't want to hear this, but that coal needs to stay in the ground if we're going to avert catastrophic climate change. And even if that wasn't happening, this is still a bad idea, because we are basically becoming a coal chute for these private corporations. They're going to funnel all these 100 million tons of coal a year down through the Columbia River Gorge, and that process deposits dust. We should have some other pictures that show you dust coming off of the trains and dust along the railroad tracks. And
climate change, you mentioned climate change a minute ago. There are some people who have some recognition as being experts or something who insist that there is no such thing as climate change.
Well, I don't know how many experts there are who insist there's no climate change. There's a handful of actual climatologists who still are holdouts in the consensus.
Yes.
Most of them, and really off the top of my head, I can only think of 5. And the news media keeps recycling these gentlemen in order to try to make it seem as if there's a large amount of opposition to this in the scientific community, and there just isn't. And these other people, like Richard Lindzen comes to mind. He's a climatologist who's on Fox News all the time, and he has a theory about what's really going on in his mind to explain climate change, or at least what we're perceiving as climate change, without the impact of fossil fuels. And while the rest of the scientific community has analyzed his research and found it incredibly lacking to explain what we're currently seeing.
You put it very gently.
Yeah, and he just doesn't want to admit that. So he keeps plugging away and keeps furthering this culture of denial, which is extremely dangerous, because in the minds of the public, it's making everybody think that there's still some debate going on, there's still a lot of uncertainty, and there's not. The only minute kind of uncertainty is exactly when these changes are going to happen. And by that, I don't mean like now or 1,000 years from now. I mean like 50 years from now or 70 years from now.
That's soon, huh?
And yeah, and so that's the only level of uncertainty. And the other thing is how bad will it be? And how soon will it be? So, I mean, we're already now seeing changes, so it's already begun. We're already seeing sea level rise, we're already seeing changes to growing patterns and wildlife migration patterns. So this is happening, and a lot of deniers have now shifted to be talking about how, well, okay, climate change is happening, but it's not man-made. They're trying to say it's all natural somehow. And yes, there is natural background climate change going on all the time. But usually when you're talking about natural climate change, you're talking about processes that take millions, if not hundreds of millions of years to take place. So you're talking about a temperature degree change of 2 to 3 degrees over thousands of years. Well, we're talking and seeing a temperature of 2 to 3 degrees change over just 100 to 200 years. And that's what's so problematic, and that's what's so urgent.
And the evidence is there, huh?
Oh, the evidence is clear. It is warming, and the other thing is, you know, we know how much CO2 we're pumping out. We know how much CO2 is in the atmosphere. We know how much was there before the Industrial Revolution. And we know how much we've been pumping out and how much we've been adding. And so my question to a lot of these deniers is, how could we not be having an impact? And that's the thing, is they want to pretend like what we're doing is so little and insignificant, but we have almost doubled the concentration of CO2 in our atmosphere within the last 200 years. How could you not have an impact? You know, it's incredibly irresponsible and arrogant of us to pretend like our actions don't have consequences. And that's what this is, and that's what's going on with climate change.
Our meaning be people who are mining coal in America, or humans on the face of the earth?
Well, humans on the face of the earth in general, but I mean, you know, we're going to have an impact. We're going to have an ecological footprint no matter what we do. But the question is are we being irresponsible with that footprint, and are we inordinately putting a burden on the ecosystem and the environment that isn't really fair? And
Why are
isn't
we
really
doing
just?
that? Why are we being irresponsible? I'm talking about particularly in America.
Yeah, well, it brings easy economic prosperity to certain powerful people, and they don't want to give that up. So, and it's not like it's going to ruin our economy if we get off of fossil fuels. It's just maybe going to ruin certain people's economies, like coal companies and coal corporations and oil corporations.
I was reading somewhere
But
recently
we'll
about
transition to something else.
where Germany is far ahead of most nations in its weaning off of fossil fuels.
Yes.
And they have some.
Well, it's become a
3% renewable,
little confusing as of late, because, and you might have heard some talking points on the common news media again, where conservatives are saying Germany is increasing its reliance on coal, and so it proves that solar isn't working and isn't a viable replacement. Well, the reason for that is they are increasing their reliance on solar. They are also temporarily having to increase their reliance on coal, but that isn't because of renewables. It's because of Fukushima, and because Germany made a decision to shut down all their nuclear plants as fast as possible. And it's to compensate for that. That's why they are ramping up coal. But their end game is to eventually shut those all back down again once they get enough renewables up and running. So
It sounds like they're the more intelligent of the industrialized world anymore.
yeah, well, at least in comparison to us, yes. I mean, we should be leading the pack in terms of solar and wind development, and we are just lagging behind even countries like China. China is doing more to implement renewable energy than we are in this country, and that should just be embarrassing. I mean, we've had industrialization in this country for over 90 years, maybe over 100 years longer than China has, and they're already on track to outpace us in terms of renewable energy. That's just embarrassing. So we really have to get our act together. So.
How are we going to do that?
Well, the way we do that is step by step, and as we make commitments to new infrastructure. So, and that's why projects like these coal trains and oil transport are so important. Not only because of the impact that it has locally, either the coal dust or with the oil trains, and you might see there's another map of the oil trains if they could throw that up right now. You know, we're talking about massive increases in infrastructure development that's committing us to fossil fuels. And that's exactly what we need to not be doing. We need to be shifting our investment into renewable technologies. And especially when you look at this and you really study these coal and oil transports. Yeah, so these, and they keep claiming that this is to ship oil from North Dakota down to the California coast. But that doesn't really make sense to us. And we look at all these new terminal proposals and we're thinking, it seems pretty clear they want to start connecting Canadian oil to overseas markets, and they want to start exporting this oil overseas.
To make money.
So, to make money. And that's the thing, is all these terminals, they're not about increasing, you know, you'll hear a lot of times from conservative talking heads that we need to increase our energy independence, or we need to increase energy security in the United States. Well, none of this is about that. This is about foreign corporations taking our natural resources and profiteering off of them by selling them on world markets. It has nothing to do with increasing or decreasing rather our reliance on foreign oil, you might hear. That's all just a red herring. So if we really want to get energy independent, if we really want to develop new infrastructure that's going to make us more secure and make us more independent, then we need to be looking towards renewable energies. If nothing else, I mean, there's some other slides of explosions that have happened with these oil trains. That one, for example, as you can see, happened in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, July 6th of last year. 48 people died because it blew up in the middle of town, leveling the entire downtown area. The problem is those oil trains are not normal crude oil. They're they have in them what's called Bakken crude oil, and this is a fracked oil, like natural gas fracking. It's the same kind of process, only with oil. And so when
more volatile?
It's much more volatile. So they pull up sort of this toxic soup of things that's more than just crude oil. It includes a lot of propane, for example. And so when these trains derail, they don't just leak, which is bad enough, and get into the water and contaminate the environment. They blow up and destroy, as you saw with Lac Mégantic, whole towns. And that explosion happened that you're seeing now in Castleton, North Dakota, just last December. Luckily, it was outside of town when it happened, but they still had to evacuate almost the entire town of Castleton because of the smoke and the fallout and the concerns over people's health because of that. So, you know, and you look at where these train tracks go through the Columbia Gorge, through downtown Vancouver and downtown Portland, and you don't have to think very long before you can picture that kind of fireball happening right here in a populated area, or even out in the gorge where they would never be able to put the fire out. They would just contain it and let it burn itself out. That would be devastating for the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, and it would be devastating for the communities that exist out there. And heaven forbid it happened in Vancouver, where thousands of people would die if that happened. So we want, and we have a petition on our website, we want people to contact Governor Inslee and Governor Kitzhaber and tell them not to permit any of these new oil facilities until those safety concerns are addressed. And it's our belief that they probably can't even address these safety concerns.
Who are these governors that the viewers should contact? Say that again.
Governor Inslee in Washington and Governor Kitzhaber here in Oregon.
And tell them...
And tell them do not grant any of these permits for these new oil terminals. So, and for that matter, if you're calling in, or if you are going to send a letter to Governor Kitzhaber or call him, ask him and tell him he recently made a statement against coal exports and said it's time to say no to these coal terminals. So tell him that you agree with that and you want him to turn those words into action and deny the permit for the Port of Morrow coal facility, which is coming up at the end of the month. So those are our two main issues, these coal and oil terminals. And we think that they by far pose the biggest threat that the Columbia River Gorge has ever seen, and probably the greatest threat that the Pacific Northwest has ever seen.
That's a pretty broad statement.
It is, but I think it's pretty accurate. I mean, and I know there's been a lot of work done and a lot of awareness over the years about Hanford, for example. And there's, of course, a big concern out here with deforestation and the logging industry and what's going on there. But I think this beats all of them, if you take them together anyway, at least, especially in terms of climate change impacts.
Yeah, we've got maybe 15 or 16 minutes left to talk about this stuff.
Cool. Yeah, start asking some questions then.
And you said you just yesterday were talking to some Native Americans. Will you talk about that?
Yes. Yeah, we drove out to Boardman, Oregon, which is where the only coal plant in Oregon exists, ironically. But they are shutting that down in 2020. It's on schedule to be shut down. There was an environmental campaign led by Sierra Club and Friends of the Gorge and a bunch of other local environmental nonprofits to get that with a shutdown date. So that's good.
Huh?
Yeah. But that's where one of these terminals, the Morrow Pacific Terminal for coal, they want to build that. And instead of taking it on train all the way to the coast, they would load it onto barges there and barge it down to the Columbia River and then put it on ships. So that's the only one that's still left to be proposed in Oregon, the only coal terminal anyway. The other two are in Washington. And there are tribal treaty fishing grounds of the Yakima Nation very close to that site. So the Yakima Nation and most of the native tribes that have tribal treaty rights anywhere near any of these oil or coal facilities have really started to speak out against them and take a strong stance against them because of the impacts they would have.
Yes.
And so yesterday, there was, and people might have been seeing it in the news, it's been getting pretty good coverage. The Yakima Nation held a press conference, and we were very happy to go out there and support them on that in opposition to that coal export terminal. Friends of the Gorge, and I also gave a ride to a representative from Sierra Club and Greenpeace and 350.org. So there were a few people that wanted to go out and support the Yakima Nation. And the Lummi Nation, or the Lummi tribe, was there as well. And they are doing, they have been doing a totem pole journey, which you may have heard of, throughout the Pacific Northwest and Canada, where they made a totem pole specifically on the issue of fossil fuel threats. So coal and oil and tar sands oil. And they've been going all over the Pacific Northwest doing tours and talks, and they're going to do another one. And then a number of the other tribes are doing a canoe journey, I believe, but I don't have the details on that with me. So the tribes are getting very involved. And
are they going to have any impact on this issue, the tribes?
I certainly hope so and think so. I mean, obviously, the American government has a long history of abusing and neglecting their agreements with the Native Americans.
Yeah.
But the Army Corps of Engineers normally does not respond to public input and public comment and concern. They're fairly insulated from the public spotlight,
Sure.
and they have a permit for this facility. The one sort of entity outside themselves that they do pay attention to are Native tribes, because if the Army gets contacted by the tribes on an issue and they say we are against this proposal, they take very big notice of that. So they have a very good opportunity here to interfere with the Army Corps of Engineer permit, if nothing else. So that's a good sign. And don't get me wrong, like I said, we have been winning, and I think we're going to keep winning. We just need to make sure we keep public opposition strong and public pressure on the decision makers. So, I mean, Governor Kitzhaber released a good statement a few weeks ago on this, and we're hoping to see a good decision from his office by the end of this month.
Do you think in the next 5 or 10 years we'll look back and say, oh, hey, we were successful in stopping oil and coal shipments through the Pacific Northwest and through Oregon and through the Columbia River Gorge? Do you think we're going to be able to shut that down?
Yes, I think so. I think especially the coal. I think we're on a good track for that. The oil has me a bit more concerned. If nothing else, the number of proposals is so much larger and sort of scattershot, except for the Tesoro Savage terminal in Vancouver, which would be a giant, brand new, huge terminal. All the others are smaller existing facilities that are just applying for a permit to change what they do at those facilities.
Sure.
And because they want to start accepting this oil and transporting it over, well, maybe overseas, at least for the time being down to California. So I'm a little bit more worried about those, just because we're kind of strapped on resources and manpower to fight them all, or manpower, sorry, that's a sexist term, people power.
I gotcha.
And so I would like to see a little bit more of that happening. There's a great group working on this in Vancouver, though. There's a lot of opposition to it in Vancouver. There's a lot of opposition to most of these in Grays Harbor. There's 3 terminals that are being proposed. And the Native tribes are getting involved in the oil as well as the coal, so we're getting those allies. And it's good because it's you know, a lot of people look at them and just see fossil fuels and kind of lump them into the same category, but they are kind of 2 different beasts, and so you get kind of different situations on your hand when dealing with them both. But I think that the oil might be a more difficult fight in the long run. We'll just have to wait and see.
But you think you'll win with the coal, battle against coal?
Yep. Oh, and I think we'll win with the oil too. It's just a matter of time and if we can get enough public opposition to it. So. Yeah, if you're watching this, please get up off your couch and from behind your computer and consider coming to one of the protests or rallies or writing a letter or any number of things.
The main threats or risks to local communities from these proposals. I think you've covered those little. The general worldwide threats or risks of fossil fuels and its continued use and mining and uncovering. What kind of threats to the world's population?
Well, of course, the biggest one we've already talked about, which is climate change.
Climate change, yes.
But and the thing with resource extraction is right now, because of sort of the worldwide corporate structure we've got going, it's an inherently unjust structure. Because you have massive international corporations manipulating and exploiting typically third world nations and third world peoples in these resource-rich areas that they're just kind of stealing the resources from and manipulating and abusing the local populace. And
so
the oil companies, what else is new? And I don't think any other resource extraction process has been more blatantly guilty of that than oil corporations. It's just everywhere you look around the world, even right here on this continent in Canada. You look at the Indigenous peoples, the First Nations of Canada, who live in these communities downstream from the tar sands operations, and their rates of cancer are many times higher than the average background rate. Their water is poisoned. The food that they subside on, it lives in that water, so their food is poisoned. They're living in a toxic environment which is only toxic solely because of those tar sands developments. So it's just a mess every way you look at it. Even if climate change wasn't happening and climate change wasn't real, which it is, there would still be all these other horrible side effects. And, you know, nothing's perfect. You know, if we're going to develop things and we're going to extract resources from the earth, that's going to have a footprint. But we need to start thinking about this less in terms of how we can maximize our profit to the greatest extent possible, and start thinking more about the consequences of our actions. And it's not wrong to take resources and food and other things from the land to sustain ourselves, but it is wrong to abuse those resources and to take far more than we need, and to take it at the expense of not only our fellow human beings, but of our fellow sentient beings on the planet, the animals.
Where are we shipping this coal and oil to for the most part?
Good question. So I said Asia, but it's kind of general with the coal. Most of the coal would probably go to China, although we're now finding that the economic market in China isn't looking as good for this as it was when they first started proposing these facilities. So coal demand is starting to plateau in China.
Really?
Yeah, they know they have a huge problem with pollution from coal. The people are starting to protest and riot in China because of how bad the pollution is. So yeah, communist, authoritarian China, the people are starting to protest, which is great.
I've heard a little bit about that, but not to the extent you're
Yeah.
indicating. Yeah.
And like I said, China's also outpacing us in terms of renewable development. So
In many ways,
in
not
many
just
ways,
that, yeah.
So they're looking at trying to get a hold of this as soon as they can. And so whether or not these facilities would even be in the end profitable is now a major question. And so that's one of the other things. If we just delay these decisions long enough, we may get to the point where it doesn't even make current economic sense for these companies to move forward, and they may just fold up and go home. And many times with these environmental fights, that's what you have to do. You just have to delay it long enough to where conditions change, to where these corporations realize it's not worth the hassle. So with the oil's different. Right now, all the industry is claiming this would just be American oil from North Dakota that they would be transporting down to Canada. But I don't buy that, and most of the other people I know don't buy it. They already have rail lines that go from North Dakota down to California. Why not just transport it directly there on rail? Why add this whole other extra step of transferring it onto ships and going down the coast? We think that as soon as these terminals are up and operating and permitted, because of the nature of Bakken crude, those facilities will be able to handle tar sands crude. And so we think they'll start accepting Canadian oil right away, and there's no limitations on Canadian oil. They can ship that wherever they want. So anywhere around the world, anybody who wants to buy it would be able to buy it, and we would start shipping out oil from these facilities to all over the world. And we also think that the law right now that says that you're not allowed to sell domestically produced oil overseas, that could be overturned, you know, at any moment if the fossil fuel companies decided to put enough lobbying effort behind it. So
I know in my lifetime we won't see a real change on the world depending on fossil fuels. But in your lifetime, do you think before you pass away that you will see the world change and its dependence on fossil fuels?
Well, assuming I don't get hit by a truck tomorrow or anything, I certainly hope so, because if it doesn't, then that means we are not going to be able to avert the worst effects of climate change. And so if that happens, you're talking about eventually seeing a full melt of the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheet. You're going to see a melting of most of the Himalayan glaciers, which means an end to the freshwater supply for a third of the world's population. You're going to see the traditional growing areas be changed.
Do you see that changing in the next 20 or 30 years?
It's possible, and I mean growing patterns are already changing.
Yes.
So who knows? And this is the scary thing about climate change. You know, scientists are, despite what they're painted right now as in the public light, they're a very responsible group of people, and they tend to be very conservative. And I don't mean that politically. I mean they tend to be very conservative in their estimates and in their predictions. And almost every time they have made a prediction, the reality of what has happened has turned out to be happening faster than they were warning it would.
Yeah.
So that should be sending off alarm bells in people. Not only are the scientists right and climate change is happening, but it's happening faster than even they were saying in their conservative estimate that it would be. So, I mean, even the recent news, I don't know if you've been following it, but the recent news with the West Antarctic ice sheet,
Yes.
it's melting much faster than they thought it would be.
Yes.
And this is the big problem, you know, it's not, you know, there's all this controversy over the polar ice cap in the North Sea, but the real issue is when these land-based glaciers melt, because that's really where most of the sea level rise is going to come from. And if people, you know, people think, you know, oh, well, sea level rise, what kind of impact is that going to have? It'll happen slow enough that we can handle it. But most of the world's population centers are located on the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And just think about real estate value, if nothing else. Think about how valuable beachfront property is. And if that all gets flooded, imagine the loss in real estate values alone. Not to mention countries like Bangladesh, countries like the Maldives, which would be completely submerged.
Yes.
Your entire country just disappearing beneath the waves. I mean, you know, as Americans, we don't really worry about that, but try to put yourself in the position of somebody who lives in the Maldives, and you're faced with the reality that in 50 to 100 years, and maybe sooner, your country will be gone.
That's somebody in the Maldives is not making profit from the way the system exists today.
Right, exactly.
Now, you mentioned politics. How is the Obama administration behaving considering this issue in oil and coal and what's happening?
Well, the thing that's been most prevalent in the news, of course, is with the Keystone XL, because his State Department actually has input on that, direct permitting authority over that. I think they've been far too lax and not taking strong enough action. But I've been critical of Obama over that from the start. And I think people got, understandably, wrapped up in sort of the romance of his campaign, and we're all very excited that this young African-American guy was running for president and looking like he was going to win, and then he did win, and that was very exciting. But, you know, his campaign promises were not very progressive, and he didn't really lie that much. I mean, he basically said he wasn't going to do much, and he hasn't done much, so... And I was kind of pointing that out to people at the time, and it's why I didn't vote for him. But
why is he behaving this way?
Well, you know, and that's the thing is, even though our modern public, the public perception of him in the media is that, you know, they're trying to paint him as this crazy left-wing liberal nut, but he's through and through a moderate. Obama's like the pure definition of a moderate. He's so center line, and he's so preoccupied with trying to get people to cooperate and work together, and it's like, that's not what we need right now.
I've been looking for something for you and I to fight about, because there's been a kumbaya moment here. But the people he surrounded himself with in his government are not moderates or centrists.
Well, not all of them.
They're so far conservative, if I may, on the political continuum. They're just the opposite of a progressive or a liberal. So he surrounded himself with these kinds of people across the board.
Oh, so you're saying he's actually even more conservative than moderate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's.
And I could see that argument, and I wouldn't necessarily argue against it. What I definitely am pushing back against is this idea that he is some socialist liberal, which is what he's being painted as in the media, and he's not. He's absolutely not.
Who's going to replace him?
Oh, I don't know. I hope Elizabeth Warren. She keeps saying she's not going to run, but...
how about Bernie Sanders?
I think they should run on the same ticket, Warren and Sanders, for the next ticket. I mean, it sounds like Hillary's going to be the Democratic frontrunner. If she is, I'm not going to vote for her. I mean, we don't need another Clinton as president. We need someone much more
I don't need somebody who's that conservative to be kind in labeling her.
Oh, and let me be very clear. I am not espousing the political standings of Friends of the Columbia Gorge. This is just me talking right now. We do have many conservative members, and you know, that's fine. But me personally, yeah, I'm pretty darn progressive and liberal leaning in my political views. So, as being an environmentalist, you might guess.
To me,
so, yeah, I suppose humanistic. Yeah, that works. But
yeah, I don't. Be careful of labels here. Yeah. Now I'm looking at the clock, and we're running out. So how about you look at camera 3 and tell my viewers what would be important for them to remember.
Right. So, You can go online to our website, gorgefriends.org. We have a number of petitions on there, and we keep a number of updates going on there. You can subscribe to our action alerts, and those come directly from me, and I will let you know whenever there are important hearings or other events going on. But you can go online, you can sign our petition to both governors about the oil permits, and please sign up for the action alerts, because that's how you'll find out about upcoming hearings and upcoming comment periods. There's an hearing actually on the 28th of this month regarding the Vancouver oil terminal, and that's going to be held by FSEC, which is the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, on land use consistency. So if you want to know more about that, please subscribe to our action alerts. And yeah, just stay informed as much as possible. And feel free to email me or call us anytime with any questions. All my information's available on the website.
You've been a delightful guest.
Thank you. It's been wonderful being here.
Really enjoyed it. Let's find about sometime in the future when there's added information or new information that would be useful for the viewers to add to what they've learned at this interview here, and we'll get you back on the show again.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
So it looks like it's about time to wind down. Shall we have some public service announcements, Mr. Director, please? Yeah, to watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube, and there's hundreds of shows through the years, all sorts of guests, all sorts of issues, and you'll find it quite interesting and fun. And we didn't mention the ACLU earlier on, the American Civil Liberties Union. That's one of my favorite organizations.
They're a great
Without
group.
the ACLU, we would have lost our civil liberties completely by now. And to end corporate personhood, and the Citizens United decision, go to move-to-amend.org, so we can amend the Constitution to say that corporations are not persons, only flesh and blood human beings are, and money is not speech. Yeah, and learn about humanists and humanism. I'm a humanist minister. Go to the AmericanHumanist.org and learn more about humanism. It's an alternative to traditional religion or religions, and we like to think it's probably the way to go. I'm not very unbiased on that one. And the Alliance for Democracy is my favorite organization on a national level. And go to the national website at the AllianceForDemocracy.org, and the Portland website at www.afd-pdx.org to learn more about the Alliance for Democracy. And my friend David Delk at the Alliance for Democracy Portland has a show called The Populist Dialogues, and that's where you can watch his interviews. Click on AFD videos. Oh, I got to tell you about KFC. Not that KFC, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind. Be friendly. And be charitable. To you too. And you too. And Mike behind the camera. And the control room. And you too. Thanks again.